The first reading is recorded in the second book of Samuel. After the death of Saul, when David had returned from defeating the Amalekites, David remained 2 days in Ziklag. David intoned his lamentation over Saul and his son Jonathan. He ordered that the song of the bow be taught to the people of Judah. It is written in the book of Jasher. He said, "Your glory, O Israel, lies slain upon your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, or the daughters of the Philistines will rejoice, the daughters of the uncircumcised will exult. You mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain upon you, nor bounteous fields. For there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul, anointed with oil, no more. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, nor did the sword of Saul return empty. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely. In life and in death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you with crimson in luxury, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of battle. Jonathan lies slain upon your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Greatly beloved were you to me. Your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. How the mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war perished. Word of God, word of life.
The Holy Gospel according to Mark. Glory to you, O Lord. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue named Jairus came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." So he went with him. And a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said, "Talitha, come," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this, they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this and told them to give her something to eat. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. You may be seated. Well, greetings, friends, from our liberating God who lives with us all. And happy Pride Sunday. And boy, what a week it has been. As Pastor Terry shared, this past week we have been celebrating Vacation Bible School with over 100 kids, teen crew leaders, and adult volunteers. While this week has been filled with smiles, joy, laughter, and friendship, so I found myself leaving here exhausted from the energy of 150 kids. So I was a bit taken aback when I started to sit down with our reading today from 2 Samuel. It felt like a huge energy shift coming from VBS into this reading. But before we dive into 2 Samuel, I want us to recall where we've been. Over these past couple of weeks, we've been exploring the book of Samuel that recalls King Saul's rise and fall to power as he became corrupt in kingdom. As we hear of Saul becoming lost with power, we witness David be lifted up and celebrated despite Saul's evilness, because David trusted God. 1 Samuel ends with Saul dying in battle alongside his son Jonathan, who I like to call David's soul friend. So we now find ourselves here at the beginning of 2 Samuel, where David learns of their death and the deep pain that he feels because of their loss. Our reading today is a direct lament of David's pain. While Saul's power and selfishness took over David and Saul's relationship, Jonathan's relationship with David is often seen as a model of deep, selfless friendship. Jonathan's loyalty to David is so deep that he is willing to sacrifice himself for David's life. And in our reading today, we hear David proclaim that love goes deeper than that for a woman. Now, there's a whole pride sermon just right there in that little bit, but I want us to focus on that deep friendship. Jonathan and David's presence allowed them to grow intimately close in friendship, and I believe that friendship embodies God's unconditional love for us. Jonathan recognized David as a kindred spirit, and together they made a covenant of friendship. Jonathan pledged his loyalty and support to David, even though it meant potentially forfeiting his claim to the throne. Now, friendships like Jonathan and David's, I believe, are critical for our time here on earth. We need to know we have someone who sees our soul and supports the intimate parts of ourselves that we might be too scared to show the world. And now we witness David mourning the loss of that relationship. And what I appreciate about our reading from 2 Samuel today is that David doesn't mourn alone, but rather mourns and grieves in community. When David first finds out, he's with his soldiers, and as he weeps, so they weep alongside him. They were present in David's grief and walked alongside him as he processed this life-changing news. Now, I'm sure many of you here can recall a moment similar to that moment that you received life-changing news. And these moments become ingrained in our memories and can create a moment of change in our lives. In moments of tragedy and loss, We may find ourselves needing someone to be present with us, someone who isn't looking to say the right words, but just offer a presence to grieve alongside us. One of my first experiences of communal lament was in high school after unexpectedly losing a friend. Our friend group had been in band together for years, from jazz band to concert band to spending our hot summers practicing marching band routines. The band room and that community served as a sanctuary. And as we tried to go about our first day back in school after losing our friend, we found ourselves coming back to that sanctuary in the band room. We spent the rest of that day together in the band room, creating a presence for each other to bring our grief and to process it together. Instead of running away from our pain, we faced it together. We were present to remind each other that we didn't have to walk the difficult path of grief alone. Our reading from Samuel today echoes similar themes of communal lament. David calls on the daughters to weep with him in grief. He wants people to be with him as he mourns the loss of King Saul and his dear friend Jonathan. As I reflect on this while thinking about celebrating Pride this morning as an affirming congregation to the LGBTQ community, I was reminded of the profound presence and belonging found in Jonathan and David's relationship. That practice of presence is the very thing needed as allies to the LGBTQ community. For many of us here, including myself, coming to affirm and celebrate the LGBTQ community has been a long path, met with conflict, tension, and reality checks. Proclaiming to affirm the LGBTQ community requires being present with one another. It can be challenging as allies to understand the experiences of LGBTQ people. But being present in a diverse community helps us better understand our unique lived experience. To witness how God shows up in our diverse experiences and identities and of those we are in community with. While this all sounds beautiful, many things push us away from communal presence, one being kingdoms. With kingdoms come power over others. And we see each other as enemies and different rather than bearing witness to our unique beings. In kingdoms, we start ignoring the suffering of others and instead focus on our own comfort. We demonize each other to justify the inhumane way that we treat one another. And it is those same kingdoms that continue to marginalize the LGBTQ community. For those of you who can recall what it was like to be in the AIDS crisis, I want you to think about how our own kingdoms spoke about those infected. Those kingdoms made us alienate them to the point that we were afraid to touch them. Their stories were erased to try to hide the pain and suffering of their lived experience because of the inability of many to be present with them in suffering. But while many gay men were stigmatized and isolated during this crisis, the LGBTQ community and allies found ways to grieve and process together. They used their gifts to create space to be present and remember the stories of those they had lost. From advocacy groups, community centers, social support networks, and art and culture. These communities helped preserve the stories of those they lost. The community came together to care for each other while the worldly kingdoms watched them suffer. On this Pride Sunday, people of God, let me invite you to move away from a kingdom mentality and into a faith focused on kingdom. Kingdom allows us to see the importance of every person's life as it bears witness to God's creation. When we focus on kingdom, we move away from separation due to hierarchies and find communal belonging that is focused on the common good. People of God, I invite you to lean into a communal kinship just like David and Jonathan. A deep love that can sustain us even in our hardest days. Kingdom invites us to put God's love for creation before wealth and power. Finding faith in kingdom means becoming an ally who practices solidarity with those on the margins of society, dropping our self-serving ways to create space for those who need our presence. People of grace, we are all God's beautiful creation, beautifully and wonderfully made just as you are, as you show up here today. I pray that this Pride Sunday, you find the communal presence of God here in an affirming community. Amen.